What is going on, guys? I'm Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me tonight is the nicest co-host in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pigskin Papers himself, Dave Hartman is here. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well. I don't know that I'm nicer than you, Paul, but because I'm kind of the grumpy old man here and you're the young guy. But no, I'm doing well. I will give you credit. You picked the Chiefs to win Super Bowl 57. I picked the Eagles. I got that one wrong. So congrats on the correct selection. I will say that at the end of our pod last week, we were talking about players to watch, and I gave two, and one of them was Nick Bolton.
Yeah.
And he was pivotal. You know, he got a fumble six. He almost got a second fumble six. He was kind of all over the field. I think he led all players on either team with 9 tackles, total tackles, 8 solo, and had a big game. I thought, neither defense really had a lot of stops. There weren't a lot of punts in the game. There weren't a lot of turnovers. Most drives ended in points. But if there's one defender who made a difference in the game, it was probably him. So absolutely. I got one thing right, but got the game wrong. But no, I'm doing well, and I'm excited to talk. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to spend some time recapping the Super Bowl and giving some thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the bigger stories heading into this off season.
Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Back to last week, though, I did have a bold call where I said I thought that Jalen Hurts would have more passing yards than Patrick Mahomes, and that actually came true. So that was kind of cool to see.
Not only came true, it came true by about 130 yards. Which was I guess a little bit surprising, but the Eagles had the ball for, and we'll get into all this.
Yes.
But the Eagles had the ball for like the whole first half.
Right.
And part of that is because of the defensive touchdown. When the defense scores a touchdown, the offense gets the other team's offense gets back-to-back possessions. So that was
right.
part of it. But the Eagles had a lot of long drives also.
Yes, they did. Well, Dave, before we get into our discussion tonight, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter.
Great. I'm at Pigskin Papers. Both of those P's are capitalized. And my blog, my website is thepigskinpapers.com. And that's where I post all my content, and then I broadcast it out on Twitter as well. How about you, Paul? Where can people find you on Twitter, and where can they find your content?
Yes, I am Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. You can find most of my content on Twitter. I stream the Cowboys podcast every Monday with my guy CD Piglet, and every Thursday you and I hop on here, Dave, and we stream from YouTube and Twitter, the ATB Fantasy Show. So all of my content can be found on Twitter.
Excellent.
All right, so Dave, you mentioned we're going to be talking some Super Bowl tonight, and let's just go ahead and get after it. What was your overall impression of the game, and did it live up to the hype?
Yeah, I think this one did live up to the hype. It was a field goal game, tons of points. People like offense. A high-scoring game. The two big stars, showed up. I think Jalen Hurts ended up with something like 375 total yards and 4 touchdowns. Converted a whole bunch of fourth downs. This play where it's unstoppable. Their short yardage play. They get 2 guys behind Hurts. He's big and strong and fast, and they just get that yard. It's almost like something they're going to have to outlaw, because it used to be you couldn't just push a guy. But anyway, I'm digressing. Hurts, showed up, had a huge game. Mahomes was obviously Mahomes, and game-winning drive and 3 touchdowns from him. He also surprisingly had 44 yards on the ground. A lot of that came on that one big scramble he had. Most of the big stars had big games. Kelsey had, a bunch of catches and a touchdown. Devonta Smith had 100 yards. A.J. Brown almost had 100 yards, plus he caught a long touchdown. So I think it did meet expectations. We expected these were the two best teams in football. We expected a close game. Most people expected a high scoring game, an exciting game. I mean, the one thing I'll say, and we'll get into this a little later, is I think the game was setting up for a really classic finish, which could have included overtime. The Chiefs, it appeared, got stopped on a third down, and then they would have had to kick a field goal, but then the flag came out for that defensive holding call, and I know we'll talk about that a little later. But that was kind of the one thing that for me didn't meet expectations, because I feel like the fans were kind of robbed of what might have been a really special finish to what was shaping up as one of those games where the last team with the football wins.
Yeah.
And it would have really been interesting to see Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense get the ball back with about a minute 45, needing a field goal to tie or a touchdown to win.
Yeah.
Knowing they got 4 downs to get every first down. I was really looking forward to seeing that, and it didn't happen. So other than that, I think it was a really good Super Bowl. The other thing I'll say is the field. The issues with the field, that shouldn't happen.
Oh, God, yeah.
The NFL should get that right. The field shouldn't be an issue, and it was. And so that was a little disappointing as well. What about you? What were your overall impressions of the game, and do you think it lived up to expectations?
Well, just to touch on the field thing a little bit, I mean, the fact that the field got painted the same day of the game is just totally ridiculous. I mean, I don't know who planned that or what happened there, but that's absolutely ridiculous. We saw guys sliding all night. As far as the game, though, I mean, this game didn't just live up to the hype, David. It exceeded all of my expectations. Like you were touching on there, though, that holding call at the end, tarnished what was a perfect borderline historic Super Bowl for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that holding call in a little bit, because I know we both have thoughts to share about that. So let me ask you this question, Paul. We heard all week about how the Philadelphia defense, had only given up 7 points to the Giants, 7 points to the 49ers. Knocked out the 49ers quarterbacks. By the time we got to the Super Bowl, including playoffs, they had, I think, the most sacks of any team in history in one season. I know that their total for the regular season was third most, behind two of the Bears teams in the mid-'80s. What happened to their defense on Sunday? Did they just run into a team they couldn't stop? Were there other problems? Did they not adjust? What do you think happened? Because they gave up 38 points, or they really gave up 31 points because there was a defensive touchdown. But what happened to Philadelphia's defense?
I think it's, you look at that Kansas City team, how good they've been, that they ran into what turned out to be the best team in the NFL, the level of competition they hadn't really faced most of the season. And when we saw Philadelphia, when they played the better teams, they tended to give up, a lot of those points. I think they had a losing record against some of the better teams. I mean, they even lost one, I believe, to the New Orleans Saints. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Dave. But, I'm not sure really what happened to the Eagles defense other than being worn out. The Philly offense only had 3 possessions, and they scored on 2 of them there in the second half, similar to what the Eagles did to the Chiefs in the first half. I feel like Philadelphia kind of lost the clock game, and that defense just got worn down.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I also think, there were a couple things I was thinking about coming into the Super Bowl. One was, knowing that the Eagles had struggled against the best quarterbacks they faced, Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott. And they didn't face a lot of really good quarterbacks on the season. Gave up a lot of points to Jared Goff in week 1. So I was a little concerned about that. And, now they're going up against the best quarterback that anyone can face, and probably the best coach at adjusting to figure out ways to score points against any defense. And so I think the Chiefs, I think part of it was that the Eagles were finally playing another offense that was hard for them to match up against.
Yeah.
But also, I think the Chiefs schemed it very well. They didn't throw a lot of long passes, right? The ball was out quick. The Eagles did put pressure on Mahomes, but when they did, he was just able to find somebody, get rid of the ball, get it out quickly. There were a lot of quick throws, and they ran the ball very effectively. And I think by running the ball effectively, I think they had something close to 150 yards rushing. Pacheco had a very good game. They got some good runs from Mahomes. They got runs from McKinnon. Also, I think they kept the Eagles' defense off balance and, away from doing what they do best. And, look, I'm on Twitter a decent amount, and immediately there were conspiracy theories about the field and how that hurt the Eagles more than the Chiefs. I'm not going to go there.
Oh gosh,
the Eagles got beat. Their defense got beat. They have a great defense, but against this kind of offense, their defense was exposed a little bit, and they also didn't adjust well. When a team throws a touchdown on a play where you don't have anyone covering the receiver, and then they run the same play on the other side of the formation, and the same thing happens, that's on your defensive coordinator and your coaching staff, and give Andy Reid credit. He's like, all right, that worked. We'll try it on the other side with Sky Moore. It worked with Kadarius Toney. So,
right.
I think Philly's defense just kind of met its match, and Kansas City's defense couldn't stop Philadelphia either. So,
right.
It's just a lot of offense. Sometimes that's the way the game goes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is Kansas City had a solid defense all year too, but you look at the game on Sunday. I mean, they gave up a lot of points, like you said. They're 35 points.
Yep.
So, Dave, we're looking at the players of the game here. Of course, Mahomes wins the Super Bowl MVP. But if you were to give the game ball to a player from each team, who would you give it to and why?
I'd have to give it. If I'm only giving out one game ball to each team, I think it has to go to the two quarterbacks. There was so much hype all week about the matchup between these two quarterbacks, and they just both showed why they're, two of the very best in the game today. And we didn't know that about Hurts. He had a phenomenal season, but I think there was a little bit of a question of how he would, play on the ultimate big stage, and he was a stud. He hit long passes, he made big runs, and he accounted for 4 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. Like if you had him in fantasy on Sunday, you couldn't have lost. He probably had something like 45 points. And I'll give it to Mahomes on the other side. He didn't have a ton of passing yards, but he played a clean game. He didn't make any mistakes, no turnovers, 3 touchdown passes, 45 yards rushing or whatever it was. I'll throw in my guy, Nick Bolton. I'll give him a game ball for the reasons I said earlier. And I'll give Andy Reid a game ball because I thought the Chiefs had a good game plan and stuck to it. Fell behind and made really good adjustments in the second half and came out and won the second half by 13 points.
What was interesting, Dave, is you mentioned Jalen Hurts having the touchdowns and he converted that 2-point conversion, the game that he had. But you look at all the playmakers from each team, and it's like they all came through when it mattered most. Look at Kadarius Toney with the punt return, the touchdown. Sky Moore had a touchdown. Of course, Travis Kelce had a big first half, and then it looks like Mahomes is going to be injured after that big scramble. He finishes the second half, has a big game, and then you look at the Eagles side, of course, Hurts, and then A.J. Brown had a long touchdown. Devontae Smith was effective. It was just such a good game. So many players could get a game ball. But for me, like you said, both quarterbacks, like you said.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue otherwise. So you alluded to the play in the second quarter, and it might have been the Chiefs' last play from scrimmage in the second quarter.
Yeah.
Where Mahomes came up and clearly he was in pain. And he, it was the only time really all game we saw that. But at that moment, down, they went into the half down 10. The last time we saw Mahomes before the half, he was in pain, limping. As someone who had picked the Chiefs to win the game, how worried were you at that point about Mahomes and about the Chiefs' ability to come back from a 10-point deficit at the half, knowing they were going to get the ball first in the second half? But what were you thinking? What was your mindset?
As soon as it happened, I said, if Mahomes is out, it's over. And, of course, in the Super Bowl, you never want to see the starting quarterback get injured. But when that happened, I mean, like I said, as soon as it happened, that if he was injured, I didn't think there was a chance that Kansas City could come back just because of Philadelphia, how they were performing on offense. I didn't think that the backup quarterback for Kansas City, Chad Henne, I wasn't sure he would be able to keep up with that type of offensive performance from the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah. I mean, I figured the good news was that halftime is really long in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And, between the time he hurt his ankle and the time he took his next snap was probably close to 45 minutes. So I figured they'd, do whatever magic they do, whether it's an injection that they then say they didn't give him or just treatment, rewrap it, whatever. He's a gamer, and I figured there was no chance he wasn't coming back and playing. But I was feeling pretty good that the Eagles were going to win the game at that point. So I just keep learning, never pick against Patrick Mahomes, never doubt him. And this was just another reminder.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Dave, we talked a little bit about this call earlier, but what are your thoughts on that pivotal defensive holding call, close to the end of the game to help Chiefs, get even closer to that, what turned out to be the last minute game-winning field goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, under the letter of the rules on defensive holding, it probably was a penalty. And Bradbury said after the game, which kind of diffused a little bit of the, people saying that the call robbed the Eagles or whatever. He said, yeah, I held him. I thought I was going to get away with it. I did grab his jersey. And I'm kind of a believer that if something's a penalty in the first minute of the game, it's a penalty in the last minute of the game.
A lot of people
Although I
that.
kind of like the way in the NHL that the refs kind of swallow their whistles at the end of a playoff game. Like you really have to kind of mug somebody to get a penalty. I just didn't like the call in that spot. I thought it was a little bit ticky-tacky, and
Definitely.
That's really kind of a selfish view because I just wanted to see I didn't want the game to end with kneel downs and then a field goal. And credit Jerick McKinnon, he was smart not to score and to slide down at the 1, which is what they coach you to do. But there are players who barrel into the end zone right there. And then, of course, the Eagles would have had a chance to come back. So I just didn't like the call from the standpoint of what it took away from the end of the game. But I do think it wasn't egregious. I don't think you can argue that there was no contact and that it was a terrible call. I just don't really like it in that spot. I say let him play, at the end of the game like that. It should be something that is a little more, the ball was probably uncatchable also, but he did disrupt the timing of the route. What did you think? What are your thoughts?
No, everything you said, I can't agree more. You want the ref to swallow the whistle there. I mean, they've been calling a really good game up until that point. Not that it wasn't a holding call, but at the same time, the impact of the call and what turned out afterwards, it's just, I think that's a call that they could have missed, and had they, shown a replay, people wouldn't have been like, wow, that was an egregious miss. It's like, I mean, that happens. It would just.
Yeah, that probably happens on a lot of plays where it doesn't get called.
Exactly.
Is the point, So let me ask you this, Paul. Was there anything about the game, nothing gets dissected more than the Super Bowl in the lead up, right? There's 2 weeks with only one NFL game coming. So, usually there's anywhere from like 13 to 16 games with only 1 week. So nothing gets the kind of scrutiny that a Super Bowl gets. Was there anything that surprised you about the game in how it played out or otherwise?
Yeah, for me, it was the first half performance by the Eagles offense is what surprised me, Dave. Scoring on 4 out of 5 possessions and taking a 10-point lead into halftime, even after gifting Kansas City 7 points, Hurts having, almost a perfect game in my eyes. I mean, that was really surprising for me. How about you?
I guess I was surprised, that the teams that were first and second on the season in sacks, that there was really no sacks in the whole game. I know Kansas City got credit for 1 sack because I think Hurts was scrambling and he ran out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage on 1 play. Like, he was never brought to the ground.
Yeah.
And neither was Mahomes. And that was just kind of surprising to me that neither pass rush, while they were able to get pressure at times, was really able to get home. I guess I was also surprised at kind of not seeing Miles Sanders for most of the game, when he was in, he kind of didn't do much other than almost fumbling. They ruled that an incomplete pass, but he almost, if that had been ruled a touchdown for the Chiefs, the Eagles would have been in pretty serious trouble at that point in the game. So, that surprised me a little bit, but they, turned out the Eagles, their offense didn't need a lot from Miles Sanders. They were just humming on all cylinders. I didn't think the game would be that high scoring. So I guess I was a little surprised at
73 points.
At 73 points. Yeah. I thought it would be more, maybe one team would get to 30 and it would be like 30-27 or 31-28. Kind of, that was my high end expectation. Because often in the Super Bowl, you've got teams with really good offenses, but also really good defenses. And, it's Super Bowls rarely play out as just, we go all the way down the field, then you go all the way down the field, then we go all the way. And there were a lot of long drives. There were not a lot of possessions in this game. Like, it kind of felt like we were saying before, the Eagles had the ball for most of the first half, and then the Chiefs had the ball for most of the second half.
Yeah.
And, a lot of 7-minute, 13 play kind of drives both ways. So,
isn't football so much better when there's not a lot of penalties called?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And not a lot of turnovers and not a ton of replays. I mean, obviously a lot of commercials. It was interesting though, it seemed like all the replays were replays that impacted, the Eagles offense. There was the Dallas Goedert catch, which they ruled a catch. There was the Devonta Smith long pass that they ultimately ruled an incompletion, which was kind of funny after what happened with the 49er game where he got the catch, and then there was the Miles Sanders, did he have 2 feet down and make a football move? And so the Eagles can complain about, the call at the end, but they got 2 of those 3 kind of important replays in their favor. So I don't think refereeing really impacted the game.
Agreed.
One way or the other, which is good.
Yeah.
Other than that, like we were talking about that call at the end, but it's a defensible call. So.
Absolutely. So, David, was interesting. Andy Reid was, of course, the head coach for Kansas City. He was the head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles for a long time when they had a lot of success there. Where does he rank for you among coaches all time?
It's a good question. I was looking this up. So there are now 14. He's the 14th coach in the Super Bowl era, obviously, to have at least 2 Super Bowl wins. He's been to 10 conference championship games. He's been to 4 Super Bowls where he's 2-2. He has obviously a phenomenal regular season record and winning percentage.
Yeah.
He's getting up there. I wouldn't quite put him in the Bill Belichick, Belichick, Walsh, Chuck Noll. They all have at least 4 Super Bowls. I wouldn't put him quite in the same league as Don Shula, who's the all-time winningest coach and went to 6 Super Bowls. After that, it's kind of hard to argue that any of the other coaches in the Super Bowl era, maybe Tom Landry, I would still, kind of put in that top group or just below it. And then I'd put Andy Reid. He's always, his teams are always really good offensively. And he always has creative, for a guy who's older, there's all these kind of like young gun coaches like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, but you see as much creativity from an Andy Reid offense as from any of them. And look, he can, he's 64. I don't know how much longer he wants to coach, but he's got Patrick Mahomes in his prime.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to think if he coaches let's say he coaches another 8 years, up through Mahomes being 35, he could have another 3 Super Bowls, potentially. And then we're talking about him alongside Bill Belichick, who has 6. So I think this was important for Andy Reid's legacy, especially because early in his career, he kind of had the reputation of the guy who always has a really good team, gets them far in the playoffs, but can't win the big one. That was certainly his reputation in Philadelphia. They went to 5 NFC championship games and only got to 1 Super Bowl, which they lost. I think he's erased a lot of that in the last 5 years. What he's done in Kansas City. They're not quite a dynasty yet, but they're knocking on the door. They have 2 Super Bowls in the last, 3 or 4 seasons, and could win more. What do you think? Where do you think Reid ranks right now?
Well, for me, I like to rank my players and coaches using a kind of this formula, if you will, where I get to see the beginning and the end of their career. And for Andy Reid, I mean, he's right there behind Belichick for me because I know he's been to a lot of title games. He hasn't had the most success as far as getting to the Super Bowl. But you think about it, I mean, 10 conference championship games. I mean, that's a lot. And I don't know. He's been a coach for 14 years. I'll take that percentage, for my coach any day of the week.
Yeah, no, he's outstanding, and he's on top of the world right now. So
yeah.
So now let's talk. We've kind of dissected, I think, most of what there is to dissect about the game. So now we'll talk about the really important stuff. What did you think of the halftime show?
I won't lie, Dave. Of course, I had family and friends over, and I like to cook and make food for people. So during the halftime show, I was kind of prepping some food and making sure the chili was where it needed to be. So I missed most of it. I don't think I got to see any of it, actually, but I didn't get to see any of it. But based on the people's reactions in the house, it was a good performance. I found out that Rihanna was pregnant. I didn't think she was, but my cousin was like, I think she's pregnant. Other than that, I don't know much about the performance. What about you?
Well, first, but before I talk about the performance, now I have to ask you about your chili. So this is like a Texas chili. There's like a three alarm fire chili, or
I didn't make it super spicy because most of the people in my household I wouldn't say they can't handle spicy food, but they don't really like spicy food, I guess, just because they can't handle the spice, I guess. So I just made, I try to make it flavorful, but not spicy.
And how many different kinds of meat in your chili?
So I went super basic. I used ground turkey for this chili and put 3 different types of beans in there. And it turned out really, really good. I mean, even my cousin was like, is this homemade? I was like, yeah, this is homemade. She's like, wow, this is really, really good. I'm not sure what she was expecting me to serve, but she was surprised at how good it was. So
no, that's impressive. That's impressive. We had some good food at the Super Bowl too, but we did not have chili because we're not in Texas.
Yeah.
For me, the halftime show, it's something I tend not to pay too much attention to. There's usually, sort of like you said, there's cooking, there's stuff to do. I did watch it, and I always find myself during the halftime show thinking about the game, and how unusual it is for the teams to have that much time at the half. It's about twice as much time, I think, as they would normally have at halftime. And so I was kind of, thinking about the fact that the Chiefs were down 10. Mahomes, sorry about my dog, by the way. I don't know if you can hear her coming through. But Mahomes potentially injured, and what kind of adjustments Andy Reid was making, and what he was saying to his team, and how Nick Sirianni was sort of, how do you motivate a team that's up 10, knowing what's on the other sideline and how good they are. So I'm always kind of wondering, like, there's this, how do they get all this stuff on the field, and then how do they get it all off the field?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the halftime show probably always makes the field a little worse, and the field was already bad.
Yeah.
I will say this, the staging of Rihanna's halftime show was really cool. The way they had like the stages like suspended from the top, and she was like way up in the air and it was moving around. I thought it was a very good halftime show, but that's not really the kind of music I listen to that much. I mean, I know some of her songs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was the target audience, but I enjoyed it. And the first thing I said was, I think she's pregnant.
Oh, really? That's funny.
And that became like a whole thing, because I guess that was sort of a reveal, which was also kind of interesting. But, for me, the Super Bowl is about the game. It's about football. It's about, 5-month NFL season coming down to, to the final moment, and the final contest. And so, I almost wish the game had a lot less with the commercials and the halftime show and the 4-hour pregame show and the confetti and a million interviews afterwards. Because I'm really there more for the football. But I get what the Super Bowl has turned into. And it's all part of the thing. And for the teams that are playing, like, they've got to, and here's where Kansas City probably had a little bit of an advantage, and with more players that had played in a Super Bowl recently than Philadelphia, like and I've heard players talk about this, who are playing in the Super Bowl for the first time, like dealing with all of that unusual circumstances, the extra long halftime, all that kind of stuff is, it's an adjustment. And I read one thing where Andy Reid, I guess, said to his players, he's like, if I catch any of you trying to sneak out and watch the halftime show, you're not playing in the second half.
Oh, wow.
Or something like that. Because for the teams, they really, this is it. This is legacy, and this is championships and Super Bowl rings and fame and fortune.
Mm-hmm.
They got to play football, and they got to tune all that stuff out. So yeah, I for me, the halftime show is fun, but I'm much more interested in thinking about what's going to happen in the second half.
Real quick, Dave, can I ask you, what did you have for halftime, or not for halftime food, but for Super Bowl food? I mentioned I had chili. I'm curious what you had.
Oh, so we had some wings, because you got to have some wings at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of chips and dips. We had a tray of chicken francaise.
What is that?
We had like, it's like chicken with like mushrooms and lemon, and it's like breaded chicken cutlets in a sauce. It's very good. And then we had a grilled kielbasa in like kind of a barbecue sauce, and then you slice it up small and eat it with toothpicks. We had other stuff too. We had nuts, pistachio nuts, and pretzels and stuff like that. And
absolutely,
plenty to drink. So we were eating the whole time, like you're supposed to. And I think we had what did we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had 6 people. Watching the game. So, when there's 6 people watching the game, you're talking a lot. You're not really like the halftime show and the commercials. You're kind of talking over a lot of it. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Dave. Another big thing about the Super Bowl, of course, is the commercials. Did you have a favorite commercial this year?
Well, so what I was just saying is I kind of wasn't paying that much attention to them. A long time ago, I could probably quote the entire movie Caddyshack. I still know most of it. I've seen it a million times. So there was one commercial that was, I think it was for Michelob Ultra.
Yeah.
That was a whole takeoff on Caddyshack. So I like that one. I kept seeing a lot of famous people in different commercials. I think I saw Ben Affleck and Ben Stiller and Jennifer Lopez, Will Ferrell. But I don't know what all those commercials were. The only one that I really remember is the Caddyshack one. What about you? Was there a particular commercial you liked the most?
Yeah, it's funny. You just reminded me of the Ben Stiller and Jennifer Lopez commercial that I thought was really funny. I like that one. My favorite commercial, though, is probably Miles Teller and his wife dancing, the Bud Light commercial, dancing during the holding period while you're on a phone call, like trying to get through the customer service. I think maybe it's just because I really like Miles Teller as an actor. I mean, he's been in some good movies. So, of all of them, I just like that one just probably because I like him.
Fair enough. Yeah. Did you I like him too. In fact, I just finished a streaming show that he was in last year called The Offer. It's on Paramount Plus, and it's about the making of the movie The Godfather. And it's based on, and Miles Teller's the lead. He plays a guy named Al Ruddy, who was the producer of the Godfather movie, and he was very young at the time. And it's the show is very good. If you like Miles Teller and you have Paramount Plus, you should check it out.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
So one last Super Bowl question, and then we'll move on to talk a little bit about the beginning of the NFL offseason. And it's a little hard to kind of handicap next season before free agency and before the draft, because a lot of teams, and we especially saw this last season with some really big name players changing teams: Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. There were a lot of them last year. But thinking about the two teams we just saw play in the Super Bowl, is there any reason to think, knowing what we know today, that one or both of them won't be back in the Super Bowl next season?
No, I can't. And, what's scary to think about is that Philly's going to get better this offseason, I'd imagine, through the draft. And Philadelphia, I mean, they've got a nice core, and I believe they'll get better through the draft. And they've got some premium draft picks again this season, if I'm not mistaken. So, no,
believe it or not.
I have no reason to think that they won't be back in the Super Bowl. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you look at the teams in the Super Bowl. Like last year, I kind of felt that way about the Rams, that was like a peak for that team. They had, Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey. Like they kind of had built that team to win last year.
Yeah.
And it was like really a really veteran team. And a team that was very top heavy and had no room for injury. And, they knew Von Miller was going to leave. And I didn't think the Rams would be terrible this year like they were. But if you had asked me this question a year ago, I would say, yeah, I don't think the Rams are getting back to the Super Bowl. I think this was kind of their year. And I felt sort of that way about the Bucs 2 years ago also. These two teams, their quarterbacks are 27 and 24, and they're both at the top of their game. Both rosters, are kind of Philly it might be a little harder for them to kind of bring back all of their talent. Kansas City by trading Tyreek Hill last year, gave themselves a little bit of breathing room. To sort of start a little bit of a
reload.
A reload. I won't say a rebuild, because they're clearly not a rebuilding team, but a reload. Philly's going to need to do that a little bit too. I think, the AFC is tougher. So I think it's going to be harder for the Chiefs to get back than the Eagles, but I think the Chiefs are a little better positioned probably to get back. But looking at both of these teams right now, and I would expect that when the season starts, they'll have the shortest odds. in Las Vegas to get to the Super Bowl. So I think they could both be back.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch of these two teams. I know it's early to say that. Of course, I always want the Cowboys to be there, but with as good as this past Super Bowl was, man, to see them play again, that'd be really fun.
Yeah, I think so too. And the Eagles would get their chance to have that last drive.
Redemption, baby. So, Dave, you talked about we're going to jump into the off season here, and we've seen some coaches and coordinators switching teams. Is there any hires here recently that have kind of jumped out to you, maybe surprised you a bit?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the Jonathan Gannon hire in Arizona, and obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not basing that on what just happened in the Super Bowl, and how poor, not just the Phillies defense didn't play all that well, but they didn't adjust. I'll keep going back to them getting 2 touchdowns where they didn't cover anybody. I know Gannon, the Eagles defense put up a lot of impressive numbers this year, and the players like him, but he was often criticized during his tenure, and he was not their defensive coordinator for that long. I think like 2 years ago, he was just the cornerbacks coach.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty quick rise for him, and a little soon maybe for him to get a head coaching job, and that Arizona team is a little bit of a mess. So, I that could be a good hire, but that one, I guess, surprised me a little bit. Sean Payton going to Denver. Very curious to see, if he can sort of reverse what happened with Russell Wilson this past year.
Yeah.
Obviously, he thinks he can, or he wouldn't have taken that job. He kind of had his pick.
Right.
And Denver, after trading all they traded for Wilson, for them to then have to trade for a coach,
right,
is like kind of crazy. And I guess the other one I would mention is Vic Fangio getting the defensive coordinator job in Miami, and like almost getting head coach money though.
Yeah.
They're paying him an awful lot to be a coordinator. So those were the 3 that I guess made me either scratch my head or take notice the most. And I'm happy for DeMeco Ryans,
Of course,
going back to the Texans where he played. And I'm really happy for him that he got a head coaching job so quickly. What about you? What jumped out at you?
So as far as NFC hires go, Dave, Brian Flores going to the Vikings as a defensive coordinator. You look at that Vikings team with the offense and everything, the year that they have. Of course, they were disappointed, but man, that defense is really, I think, what hurt them the most this season all year. Getting a guy like Brian Flores, man, that's a sneaky good hire right there. And the AFC, I'm going to go with Shane Steichen. He leaves the Eagles, becomes the head coach of the Colts. Was a bit of a surprise to me. I look at the Colts. I don't know which direction they're headed, and I don't think their team has an identity either. They've got the aging quarterback in Matt Ryan and an owner who recently said they will aggressively go after a young quarterback. I'm surprised that Steichen didn't want to run it back one more year with Philly and see if a better opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. I think those are good observations. And I mentioned this on our show last week. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Kellen Moore. So give me your quick takeaways on what's happening in Dallas and their coaching staff.
I think it's we're looking at McCarthy. This is going to be his 4th year. Had a better year this year. Every year he's progressed, but this is kind of like a make or break year for him. And my guy CD Piglet, co-host of the Across the Cowboys podcast, he thinks that if we don't, the Cowboys don't make it to an NFC championship game or, a Super Bowl, McCarthy's going to get fired. And the reason Dan Quinn, came back this year to be the coordinator is because this head coaching job is probably waiting for him in the wings. As far as Kellen Moore goes, man, Chargers are going to be fun. I think they've got an offense. They've got some pieces there that might fit a little bit better in what Kellen Moore wants to do.
Yeah, I think that's I agree with that. So, one of the things we see every year is the coaching carousel gets started before the NFL season ends with the Super Bowl. And there's always usually teams that make it to the Super Bowl have hot coordinators, and we saw it with Philly this year.
Yeah.
And we've seen it with Eric Bieniemy a little bit in the past too, and some other guys. We saw it with Brian Daboll. I mean, I know the Bills didn't go that far in the playoffs last year. But do you think that NFL teams should have to wait until after the Super Bowl to start the interviewing process for coordinators and head coaches?
Absolutely. I don't think if you're in the playoffs and you're a head coach or a coordinator and your team's in the playoffs, I don't think you should be taking any interviews for another team. And I don't think teams should be allowed to request an interview for coaches or coordinators whose teams are in the playoffs either. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be an across the board thing, because you don't want to put, like this year Steichen or Gannon at a disadvantage because they, other guys are interviewing for open positions and they can't because their team is playing. But I do think it's a distraction. In the middle of Super Bowl week, these guys are taking interviews when they,
need to be
it
focused.
should be a full-time job to be preparing for the Super Bowl. So I don't see why. I think there's enough time between the Super Bowl and the draft. And the start of free agency even.
Right.
I don't see why they just can't wait till after the Super Bowl and then open it up. And, so no interviews. I'm sure there's a reason, because I kind of ask myself this question every year. But I find it distracting and a little bit of not so much a disadvantage, but I'm sure the teams don't like it. I'm sure the Eagles, I'm sure Nick Sirianni didn't like the fact that his coordinators were busy interviewing. And look, he knows they're going to leave, right? They deserve, when you have a team that goes 14-3, people are going to start talking to your coordinators. So I don't know how to fix it, but I always just find this a little annoying around this time of year.
Agreed. So, Dave, we're going to do a little bit of rapid fire here, something we've never done, something we're probably neither one of us is very good out here. We're going to talk about quarterbacks. We're the carousel that is going to be the 2023 offseason is going to get started pretty soon. We've got a few starters from this past season that are going to be playing in different places, we assume. So let's start it off here with Derek Carr. You look at Derek Carr. Where do you see him playing, Dave?
I see him ending up in the NFC South. My first pick for him would be the Bucs, and my second would be the Panthers.
Oh, the Bucs. I like that one. For me, I'm going to go NFC South. I think Carolina Panthers, even though the Saints have been kind of getting a team that's been mentioned with Derek Carr. And in the AFC, I don't know. Tell me what you think about this. They've got a lot of cap space, Dave, and they've got a pretty good pick that they could maybe use elsewhere. The Houston Texans.
Okay. All right. Now I'll ask you the next one. Aaron Rodgers, where does he play next year?
All right, Dave.
Does he play next year, and where does he play?
Even better question. All right, again, another wild card team, but I've got some logic here, Dave. NFC team, Seattle Seahawks. They have 2 first-round picks and 4 total picks in the top 60 and over $31 million in cap space. You look at that team, they made it to the playoffs with Geno Smith. You give Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Kenneth Walker a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers with that young and upcoming defense. That could be pretty exciting. AFC team, of course, the New York Jets. I feel like this deal is all but done.
Yeah, for me, it's the Jets. At one point, I might have said the 49ers, but I just don't see that happening.
God, that'd be crazy.
He's from there, and he's still annoyed that they didn't take him with the first pick in 2006 or whenever he came out. The 49ers had the first pick. He was in their backyard playing at Cal, and they took Alex Smith, and he's still pissed off about it. That's why he's in a dark room this week thinking about his future. All right, next one. You get to ask me next on the list.
All right, Jimmy GQ, a.k.a. Jimmy Garoppolo. Dave, where's he playing?
I'm going to say the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that's been pretty widely rumored. I don't see the Raiders with with Devontae Adams, they're kind of a veteran team. They got a veteran receiver that they probably don't want to start with a rookie quarterback. I see them going the veteran route. So my choice for him would be the Raiders. What about you?
Again, NFC, I'm going to say the Washington Commanders. I just feel like this is something that they would do. They might go all in on Jimmy G, and like you in the AFC, Las Vegas Raiders. The connection with McDaniels, familiarity with the offense.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Okay, I'll ask you the next one. This is a guy, I'm only asking him because he's currently at the end of his contract. Daniel Jones. Where's Daniel Jones playing next year?
The Giants would be stupid not to bring back Danny Dimes. I don't see them letting him walk out the door. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll do a deal with him as opposed to franchising him. I think if they franchise anyone, it'll be Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
Whose contract is also up. I think they'll probably give Danny Dimes, if they can get it done, like a 3-year deal, maybe a 4-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
Not for crazy money, but for good starter money.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a smart move for them.
Yes, sir. All right. And Dave, Tom Brady, is he going to stay retired this time?
I hope so. And I think so. I think we saw last year that he can still be a decent quarterback, but I think it's time. I think it's time for him to hang him up. And so I'm going to say yes. What about you?
Yeah, it's time. I think he stays retired. He had a lot going on with his personal life this year. I really do think it's time for him to call it quits. Okay.
Yeah, I think so too. And the one thing I would say before we move on to our next rapid fire is, I count 8 teams right now that have an unsettled situation at quarterback, and that they need to address either through trade, free agency, or the draft. You've got 3 teams in the NFC South. You've got the Bucks, the Panthers, and the Saints. You've got 2 teams in the AFC South, the Colts and the Texans. You've got the Jets. You've got the Raiders, and you've got the Commanders. So that's 8 teams. So there's going to be, there aren't that many. There's Jimmy G, there's Derek Carr, there's maybe Rodgers getting traded, and I'm not even getting into the like Lamar Jackson situation or Daniel Jones with the Giants, because I think those situations will resolve themselves. But there, as always, there are not enough good quarterbacks to go around, and there are going to be some teams will look to the draft, and some teams will look to those couple of, potential starter caliber guys like Jimmy G and Derek Carr to try to answer the quarterback question. But knowing that there are that many potential openings, our second rapid fire is a bunch of quarterbacks who, were starters at some point this season, but it might be a little hard to envision them being starters going forward. So we're going to go through a bunch of names, and barring injury to a starter ahead of them, will any of these quarterbacks be the opening day starter for a team either this season or in some other season? And I'll start with Baker Mayfield. What do you think?
Yeah, I could see him going the Winston route and being a backup for a year before getting a chance to start. Maybe in Tampa Bay, Dave. What do you think?
That one game, I would have said no. And then he had that one crazy game against the Raiders at the end of the season on Monday night. And I'm going to give him a maybe. I don't think that this coming season he'll be an opening day starter, but I do think there's a chance. Most of the guys we're going to talk about are pretty young. I still think there's a chance that at some point he's an opening day starter for a team. He was a number 1 pick 5 years ago.
Right. I mean, I don't know, those guys. I feel like guys like Baker, they just kind of stick around, and they find a way to stay in the league. And before you know it, they're starting again.
Yep.
All right. What about Sam Darnold, Dave? What are your thoughts on him?
I'm going to say doubtful. I think the only way, I think that he has, kind of failed twice now, in a bigger way than Baker. I don't think, I think Baker, got the Browns to the playoffs that one year. Has had more moments than Darnold, and has generally showed out a little better. I think the only way I can see Darnold as an opening day starter again is if he's a bridge to a rookie, where he's just starting, kind of like what Mitch Trubisky was this year in Pittsburgh. What do you think?
No, he's done. I mean, his years in, you give him a pass for what happened in New York with the Jets and everything, but after back-to-back failed seasons in Carolina, I think he's done.
Okay. Carson Wentz.
I think the Wentz experiment is over, Dave. He's injury prone, and he doesn't have the mental toughness to be a starting quarterback in my eyes. What about you?
No, I agree, and I also think that people I don't think his teammates love playing with him.
No, they don't.
I don't think he's that much of a leader, so I'm going to say no on him also. I'll just do the next three real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Davis Mills.
I'd be surprised if he was the starter again, but in the right system, I can see him being a starter again, Dave. What about you?
He's still very young. He's only been in the league 2 seasons, so I could see somewhere down the road, or even this year, if Houston drafts a quarterback and they don't want to throw him in day one, I could see Mills being a bridge. But I think he's probably ultimately going to be a career backup.
Okay.
Jameis Winston. This is an interesting one because he's the oldest guy I've mentioned thus far.
Dave, call me crazy, but absolutely. I think he should follow Peyton to Denver. I think Russ might actually be washed.
Interesting.
I
wonder what was the deal with his injury last year, because they were saying he was healthy, but they still didn't bring him back to play over Andy Dalton. And that just made me kind of scratch my head. I don't know if that was a Dennis Allen thing in New Orleans, or if maybe the back injury was worse than they were saying. But it was odd to me that he didn't get back in there. I don't know that he's ever going to start again, or be an opening day starter, I should say. And the last one, and I'm not even getting into Matt Ryan, because I think that one's too easy. Zach Wilson, who has, been in the league for 2 seasons and was the 2nd overall pick.
He has all the tools, but can he put it all together is the big question, Dave. I think a team will give him a shot, so I'm going to say yes.
Okay. I'm going to say no on him. I just haven't seen anything that indicates that he's good enough to be an NFL starting quarterback.
Fair enough. Okay, Dave, sticking, we're kind of going to the draft theme here, and you look at the Chicago Bears with the number 1 overall pick. Is there any chance they trade Justin Fields for a big package of players and picks and take another quarterback, maybe Bryce Young from Alabama?
I don't think so. I mean, anything is possible. I guess there's sort of 3 things they could do with the pick. They could take a quarterback and trade Fields, which I don't think they'll do. They could trade down, with someone like the Colts at number 4, or the Panthers at number 9, or even the Texans at number 2. If there's a guy they absolutely want and they don't want someone jumping ahead. Or they could take the best player available, which would probably be the edge rusher from Alabama. So of those 3 things, I think by far the most likely is that they trade down. The Bears have a lot of needs. They got needs at receiver. They got needs along the defensive line. They got needs at linebacker, kind of all over the place. So my guess is that they trade down and that they've seen enough that they think they can build around Justin Fields, and they still have him for 3 more years on a rookie deal. What do you think?
Chicago would be very, very dumb in my eyes to trade away Fields. You look at him; he's got the size, He's mobile. He's got the arm. He's got the smarts. I just don't see it happening. I think they trade it for Hall. Like you said, they have a lot of needs, and I think that'd be the savvier move.
Yeah. So I know we're getting ready to wrap up. We're kind of right at the 1 hour mark here. So let me ask you, the confetti has fallen. The Super Bowl is over. The Chiefs have been crowned champions, as many thought they would. What's your number one lasting memory from this past NFL season? What do you think you'll remember the longest?
This might be a bit surprising, Dave. I'm going to go with a bit of a sadder moment. The incident with Damar Hamlin on Monday Night Football, just the NFL doing the right thing for once and canceling the game. It was nice to see the world remembering that life is more than just a game and bigger than football. So that moment was what stood out to me most. For me, is going to be the lasting memory for me from this season. What about you?
I have the same answer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That is the first time that I can remember the NFL canceling a game.
Mm-hmm.
It was a scary moment. We were all kind of riveted to our televisions. I thought maybe he had died. It was, for the Tua moment was scary.
Yes.
When he had his hands like that, oddly enough, on the same field.
Oh, wow.
In Cincinnati.
Yeah.
About 12 weeks earlier. But for me, it's that, and then it's the next week. Naheem Hines returning the opening kickoff for the Bills, and just kind of like, okay, the world works in mysterious ways sometimes. Sort of the uplifting moment, because by then we knew that Damar he wasn't completely out of the woods, but by then we knew that he was likely going to be okay.
Right.
And then they get that kick return, and it was kind of like, yeah, that's what I'll remember. I think the most from this season.
And it's funny that those two different things that kind of felt like one moment together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
So, Dave, as the 22 NFL season is officially over, what are your final thoughts on the season?
I guess my final thought is about the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. For a long time in the NFL, like Tom Brady has been the face of the league. He's been kind of the guy. Yeah. And that's been changing a little bit over the last couple of years, but he did win his 7th Super Bowl 2 years ago. And I think as long as he was playing, there was still that sort of thought that, Brady in the playoffs, like,
yes, yeah.
And now it's Mahomes. I think there's been really a changing of the guard in terms of like who's the player that people fear the most. Like if you were an Eagle fan and you're kicking off in a tie game to Patrick Mahomes with 5 minutes left, you're worried you're not getting the ball back.
Right.
That's the game. Like he's gonna use all the clock and get down and score as time expires. And that's basically what happened. Or you score and you give him 22 seconds or something and you're scared to death. And that used to be Brady. And that used to be Brady, and now it's Mahomes. And, they traded away Tyreek Hill and they won the Super Bowl. So my final thought is that is just that this team is the team of the 2020s, at least so far, with the player of the decade so far. And that Mahomes is now kind of the guy,
The new boogeyman, huh?
The new boogeyman, the new guy that everyone is scared of, nobody wants to face. If it's your team going against him and it's a tight game at the end, you're just, you're wetting your pants because you're scared of what he can do. How about you? Final thoughts about the NFL this season?
It was such a wild season, Dave, but seeing that it only takes 1 year sometimes to go from bottom feeder to playoff contender is really encouraging for me. With all the young quarterbacks in the league coming into the NFL, we talked about this a little while ago, but the NFL is in good shape. That's kind of what I'm taking out of the season because we saw, I believe it was 4 different playoff teams who made it for the first time in a long time back into the playoffs. And we saw some teams, we saw the Chiefs, not the Chiefs, but the Seahawks trade away what we thought was a franchise quarterback, sign a guy who had been a backup for a couple of years and didn't really do much as a starter, lead them to the playoffs. It's just I think we're seeing a new era of football in the makings, and it's exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you just, the Giants, the Giants, the Jaguars, the Seahawks. There were a lot of good stories this year of
Yeah.
teams that have been down and out for a while. Well, the Seahawks have been mostly good actually, but teams that nobody expected to be in the playoffs this year. So I agree. That's good stuff.
All right, Dave, here we are. We always end the episode with our bold call. What is your bold call for the NFL offseason, my friend?
I was all set to go with the Ravens trade Lamar Jackson, but I just don't see it happening. They can franchise him for 2 years. I don't think that relationship is at like the broken stage where
soured that much.
They would franchise him and he would refuse to show and hold out. So I'm not gonna go with that one. My bold call is that Will Levis is going to be the first player taken in the NFL draft.
Oh, I like that. Real quick, what are your thoughts on him?
I think what you're going to hear, the comps you're going to hear are going to be Justin Herbert. Like a guy that has all the tools, but when the NFL, scouts and GMs look at his college tape, they're going to wonder why he isn't a little bit better.
Yeah.
Why he misses some throws. But, to be fair to him, and it's kind of similar to Herbert, he didn't have much at Kentucky this year. Like Wan'Dale Robinson and I think one other receiver or tight end, that was on the team the year before left for the NFL. They really had very little talent. I think he's got the tools. And I think Bryce Young's height is going to scare at least some teams away. There's going to be some teams that won't put Bryce Young at the top of their board or anywhere near the top of their board because he's probably 5'10", and 175 pounds or whatever he is. And there are some teams that just won't take a quarterback that's that small.
Yeah.
They're worried about injuries. They're worried about him, at the next level. I mean, I think he's kind of the consensus number one pick. But it only takes one team, and whether it's the Panthers or the Colts, I do think someone's trading up to number one. But I think they're going to do it my bold call is they're going to do it to take Will Levis, not Bryce Young. And it's a bold call because it's unlikely.
Oh, man, I love that.
Young is the likely number one pick. But I think Levis, either way, I think he goes before CJ Stroud. And so, which is maybe not as bold of a call, but I think he's going to end up going number two. And so my bold call is he goes number one. What's your bold call?
All right. Well, this might not stand up to yours, Dave, but I think Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys rewind the clock and go all in on the 2023 season, something we haven't seen the Cowboys do in a long time.
So what's that going to mean? What's that going to translate to?
I think they bring in a big name free agent. They bring in a couple of big name free agents that, they actually try to bring in players that are going to be actual difference makers on the field instead of, doing these bargain bin deals that they've been doing for the last 5 years.
So do you think that that's more on the offensive side of the ball or the defensive side of the ball or both?
I think both.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have a pretty they have a pretty strong roster as it is. Now, Pollard is a free agent, right?
Yeah.
So you think they'll bring him back?
Word is, it sounds like they're going to, if they do anything, it's going to be a franchise tag.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, they could do
Which
that.
I don't hate. I don't hate, but I would rather them just draft like 2 running backs in this draft, to be honest with you, and spend that $10 million on some players on defense.
And you think they'll restructure Zeke because he's making a lot of money?
I think they'll just part ways with Zeke.
You think so? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, they probably at this point should, just because of what he's costing them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see what the Cowboys do. I mean, look, they're in the division with the Eagles, right? So they can't just tread water as good as their roster is.
Yeah.
Because they're the second best team in their division. So when that's the case, you you saw what the teams in the AFC West did last offseason, right? The teams that are looking up at the Chiefs. The Chargers brought in Khalil Mack and some other big name players. The Broncos brought in Russell Wilson, and the Raiders brought in Devontae Adams. Didn't matter. The Chiefs still won the division and won the Super Bowl. But when you're in a division with a team like that, or you saw what the Dolphins, did with the Bills ahead of them, you gotta keep up with the Joneses. So
yes, sir. Well, Dave, here we are at the end of our episode. We touched on it earlier. Let's remind the people again where we can be found on Twitter. And Dave, remind the people they can find your content and what they should expect from you for the off season.
Well, that last question is hard for me to answer right now because I'm kind of reassessing how much content I'm going to produce this off season.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'll have some stuff at least around the NFL draft that maybe the next time I'm doing a lot of writing. But in any case, I'm at Pigskin Papers on Twitter with both P's capitalized, and you can find all my content at thepigskinpapers.com. And Paul, please remind everyone where they can find you on Twitter and find your content.
Yeah, so as far as content goes, as I mentioned earlier, guys, every Monday, me and my guy CD Piglet, we stream a new episode of Across the Cowboys. We're going to have a lot of good stuff for you this offseason. We're going to do some draft talks, some talking about the schedule, free agency, all that good stuff. And then hopefully there will be some more fantasy discussions every Thursday with me and my guy Dave here, which again can always be found on Twitter. And you can, as far as me, where you can find my bad tweets, you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. I speak for both Dave and I want to say we appreciate you joining us, and we will see you guys next week.
Yep, it's been a lot of fun. And Paul, thanks for making me your co-host. This has really been a blast the last month or two breaking down the playoffs.
Absolutely, Dave. The pleasure's all mine, man. It really is. I've really enjoyed it.